I never thought I'd be telling this story. At 59, I believed my life was written in stone, that my role as mother, caretaker, and invisible servant was simply my destiny. But sometimes, destiny has other plans. My name is Diana, and for 37 years, I poured my heart into raising a son who would one day look me in the eyes and tell me I wasn't worthy of basic human respect. But this isn't just about him. This is about every woman who has ever felt invisible in her own home. Every mother who gave everything and received cruelty in return. The kitchen was my kingdom, or so I thought. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., I'd wake to prepare breakfast before heading to my part-time job at the local grocery store. I'd return home exhausted, my feet swollen from standing on concrete floors for 8 hours, only to find dirty dishes waiting for me like silent accusations. "Mom, where's dinner?" Michael would call from the living room, not bothering to look up from his phone. At 32, he still lived in my house, unemployed more often than not, treating me like hired help rather than the woman who had sacrificed her youth to raise him alone after his father abandoned us when Michael was just 3 years old. I remember the exact moment when I realized something had shifted irreversibly. It was a Tuesday evening in November. The rain drummed against the windows as I served Michael's favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables, the same recipe my mother had taught me decades ago. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the plate before him, not from age, but from pure exhaustion. He took one bite and his face contorted with disgust. "This is cold," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of contempt I'd grown to recognize and fear. "How hard is it to serve hot food, Mom? Seriously?" "I'm sorry, honey," I whispered, already reaching for his plate. "Let me heat it up for you." But he was faster. His hand shot out, knocking the plate from my grasp. The ceramic exploded against the kitchen floor, pot roast and gravy splattering across the tiles I had mopped just hours earlier. The sound seemed to echo forever in the sudden silence that followed. "You don't deserve respect." The words came out like venom, each syllable designed to wound. And then, before I could even process what was happening, his fist connected with my stomach. The pain was sharp, immediate, doubling me over as I gasped for air. But the physical hurt was nothing compared to the emotional devastation that followed. This was my son, the baby I had rocked to sleep during countless sleepless nights, the toddler whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the teenager whose dreams I had encouraged even when money was scarce. I collapsed onto the kitchen chair, one hand pressed against my stomach, the other covering my mouth to muffle the sob that threatened to escape. Michael stood over me, his chest heaving with rage, and for a terrifying moment, I didn't recognize the man he had become. "Clean this up," he said coldly, stepping over the broken ceramic as he walked away. "And next time, make sure the food is actually hot." If you enjoy stories that touch the heart and inspire hope, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything to us. And please comment to let us know which city you're watching from. I sat there in my broken kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a meal I had prepared with love, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not my heart. That was too clean a break. This was messier, rawer, like old wood splintering under too much weight. I had been carrying that weight for years without realizing it, and now the entire structure of my life was giving way all at once. The woman in the bathroom mirror that night was a stranger. Gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, lines etched deep around tired brown eyes, shoulders curved inward as if trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less of a target. When had I become so afraid in my own home? "I am not worthless," I whispered to my reflection, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. Not to myself. It was the first time in years I had spoken a truth meant only for me. The days following that terrible Tuesday blurred together like watercolors in rain. I moved through my routines mechanically, grocery store shifts, cleaning, cooking, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. The bruise on my stomach faded from purple to yellow, but the wound in my soul remained raw and tender. Michael acted as if nothing had happened. He would sit at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone while I served him eggs and toast, making casual conversation about the weather or complaining about how unfair life was to him. The normalcy of it felt almost more cruel than the violence itself. "Mom, "Can you wash my interview shirt?" he asked one morning, not looking up from his screen. "I have a meeting at that insurance company today." I nodded silently, adding it to the mental list of tasks that never seemed to shrink. Another job interview that would likely lead nowhere, followed by another period of disappointment and blame, directed at everyone except himself. "And maybe iron it extra carefully this time," he added with casual cruelty. "Last time it looked like you did it with your eyes closed." My hands paused over the coffee pot. 3 months earlier, I would have apologized and promised to do better. Now I simply said, "It'll be ready." The change in my tone must have registered because he finally looked up, studying my face with the calculating expression I'd learned to fear. "You're not getting weird on me, are you, Mom? Because I don't have patience for drama right now." Drama. As if my 37 years of devotion, my sacrificed dreams, and endless support could be reduced to something so trivial. As if the bruise he'd left on my body was somehow my fault for being too sensitive about it. His sister Lisa called that afternoon while I was folding laundry in the basement. Sweet Lisa, who had married well and moved to the suburbs with her banker husband and 2 perfect children. Lisa, who visited exactly twice a year and always managed to make those visits feel like charitable obligations. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sang through the phone with practiced cheerfulness. "How are things?" I almost told her. The words gathered in my throat like birds preparing to take flight. "Your brother hit me. I'm scared in my own home. I don't know who he's become." But Lisa had her own life, her own concerns, and I had learned long ago not to burden my successful daughter with the messy realities of her childhood home. "Things are fine, sweetheart," I said instead, my voice steady despite the lie. "Michael's looking for work again." "Oh, that's good." Lisa's relief was palpable. She never asked too many follow-up questions about her brother, preferring to maintain the comfortable fiction that he was simply going through a rough patch rather than acknowledging the man he'd actually become. "And you're feeling okay? You sound tired." "Just the usual aches and pains," I said, unconsciously pressing my hand to my stomach where the bruise had finally disappeared. "Nothing to worry about." "Well, don't overdo it. You're not getting any younger." The casual dismissal of my concerns, wrapped in false worry, stung more than she could know. "Listen, I can't talk long. Emma has soccer practice, but I wanted to let you know we probably won't make it for Thanksgiving this year. David's parents are visiting from Florida." Of course they weren't coming. Just like last year, when it was his company party. Just like the year before, when one of the children had a cold. I had spent decades hosting family gatherings in this house, creating traditions and memories that apparently meant more to me than to anyone else. "That's okay, honey," I said, though it wasn't. "Maybe Christmas." "Maybe," she agreed with the vague tone that meant probably not. "Give Michael my love." After she hung up, I sat in the basement surrounded by piles of clean laundry, his clothes, his sheets, his towels, and felt the familiar weight of invisibility settle over me like a shroud. I was the woman who maintained everyone else's life while my own slowly disappeared. That evening, Michael's friend Danny came over. Danny was cut from the same cloth as my son, 30-something, unemployed, full of big talk and empty promises. They sat in my living room drinking the beer I had bought with my grocery store wages, their voices growing louder and more obnoxious as the night wore on. "Your mom's cooking is the best, man," Danny said, demolishing the sandwich I had prepared for him. "My old lady can barely boil water." "Yeah, she's useful for that," Michael replied with casual indifference, as if I were a kitchen appliance rather than a human being with feelings. "Though she's been acting strange lately, moody or something." They laughed as if my emotions were a shared joke between them. I stood in the kitchen doorway, invisible as always, listening to my son reduce my humanity to its most basic functions. Cook, clean, serve, disappear. That was my role in his narrative. But something had changed in me since that night on the kitchen floor. Something that made their laughter sound hollow and their words feel less like truth and more like the desperate posturing of men who had never learned to take care of themselves. I thought about my mother, who had raised 5 children during the Depression with nothing but determination and love. She had never been anyone's punching bag, never allowed anyone to treat her as less than human. "Dignity," she used to tell me, "is not something other people can give you or take away. It's something you choose to carry, no matter what the world throws at you. Standing there in my own kitchen, listening to my son dismiss me as if I were nothing more than hired help, I felt my mother's words take root in the broken soil of my heart. The woman who had raised him to be better than this deserved better than this, and slowly, quietly, I began to understand that the person responsible for giving me that better life was me. The weeks that followed felt like living in a house of mirrors where everyone could see their own reflection, except me. I moved through my days like a ghost haunting my own life, desperately trying to matter in spaces that had forgotten I existed as more than a service provider. I tried harder. God help me. I tried so much harder. I woke up earlier to make Michael's coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, served in his favorite mug that I hand-washed because the dishwasher left spots. I researched new recipes online during my breaks at the grocery store, hoping to find something that might earn a smile, or at least prevent another explosion. "This chicken is dry," he announced one evening, pushing his plate away after 3 bites. He didn't look at me when he said it, just stared at his phone screen as if my failure was too insignificant to warrant eye contact. "I'm sorry," I whispered, already standing to fix it. "Let me make you something else." "Don't bother. I'll just order pizza." The dismissal in his voice was sharper than any knife. He pulled out his phone. My home-cooked meal abandoned like yesterday's newspaper. I stood there holding the serving spoon, feeling smaller with each passing second. The chicken wasn't dry. I had checked it with a thermometer, timed it perfectly, but Michael's reality had become the only version that mattered in this house. And in his reality, everything I did was wrong. When Lisa called the following Sunday, I tried a different approach. Maybe if I could connect with her, remind her that I was still her mother beneath all this exhaustion, she might see me again. "I found your old art supplies in the attic," I told her, forcing brightness into my voice. "Remember those watercolors you loved in high school? You painted the most beautiful landscapes." "Oh," her response was flat, distracted. "Yeah, I remember. Look, Mom, I'm actually in the middle of something. Can we make this quick?" "I was thinking maybe you'd like them back." I pressed on, desperate to keep her on the line, to matter for just a few more minutes. "For Emma, maybe? She might enjoy them?" "Mom, Emma has every art supply money can buy. She's not interested in old paintbrushes." The impatience in Lisa's voice was like a slap. "Besides, she's more into digital art now. It's a different generation." Different generation. As if my love and memories were relics from a museum nobody wanted to visit anymore. "I could bring them when I visit," I suggested, though we both knew no such visit was planned. "Maybe we could paint together like we used to." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Lisa sighed, the kind of exasperated sigh reserved for particularly persistent telemarketers. "Mom, I really don't have time for nostalgia right now. David's promotion means we're busier than ever, and the kids have activities every weekend. Maybe just donate the supplies to charity or something." Donate them to charity. Throw away the remnants of our shared history like they meant nothing. Give my daughter's childhood memories to strangers who might appreciate them more than she did. After she hung up, I climbed back into the attic and sat among the cardboard boxes that held pieces of a life that apparently nobody else wanted to remember. Lisa's artwork was still there, tentative brushstrokes that had grown bolder with practice, paintings of our old dog Rusty, a portrait of me she'd made for Mother's Day when she was 16. In it, I was smiling, my eyes bright with pride and hope. I barely recognized the woman in that painting. The worst humiliation came on a Thursday evening when Michael's ex-girlfriend Sarah stopped by unexpectedly. Sarah had always been polite to me during their 2-year relationship, though I'd sensed her subtle disapproval of our modest home and my son's employment situation. They'd broken up 6 months earlier, but apparently she still felt entitled to an opinion about my life. "Hi, Mrs. Morrison," she said when I answered the door, her smile perfectly practiced. "Is Michael home?" I invited her in, offered her coffee, tried to be the gracious hostess I'd always been. She sat on my sofa, the one I'd saved for 3 years to buy, and looked around with the assessing gaze of someone cataloging inadequacies. "Michael," I called upstairs. "Sarah's here to see you." While we waited, Sarah made small talk that felt more like interrogation. "How are you doing? You look tired." "I'm fine," I replied automatically. though the mirror had been telling me otherwise for months. The stress was showing in the new lines around my eyes, the way my shoulders curved inward as if trying to disappear. "It must be hard," Sarah continued with false sympathy, "having Michael still living here. I mean, at his age. Most mothers would have put their foot down by now." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Most mothers would have been stronger. Most mothers wouldn't have enabled this situation. Most mothers would have demanded better. When Michael finally came downstairs, his whole demeanor changed. He straightened his shoulders, smiled that charming smile that had once made me so proud, became the version of himself he thought worthy of attention. "Sarah?" What a surprise. He kissed her cheek, and I watched my invisible son transform into someone who could be seen. They talked for 20 minutes while I sat in my own living room feeling like an intruder. Sarah laughed at his jokes, showed interest in his prospects, treated him like he mattered. When she left, promising to keep in touch, Michael walked her to the door with more courtesy than he'd shown me in months. "Nice visit?" I asked when he returned. "She's doing well for herself," he said, settling back into the couch. "Got promoted to assistant manager at that boutique downtown. Making decent money. Unlike me," hanging by his words. Unlike his pathetic mother who couldn't even serve hot food properly. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror again. The woman staring back had gray hair that needed styling, clothes that had been chosen for comfort rather than beauty, hands that bore the calluses of hard work but had somehow forgotten how to demand respect. When did I become invisible? I asked my reflection. When did I decide that everyone else's needs were more important than my own dignity? But even as I asked the question, I could feel something stirring deep inside. Something that had been sleeping for too long but was finally beginning to wake up. December arrived with the kind of bitter cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. I had always loved this time of year. The anticipation of holidays, the excuse to fill the house with warmth and laughter, the reason to believe that families could still come together despite their differences. But this December felt different. This December, hope felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. I set up the Christmas tree alone, the same ornaments I'd been collecting for 37 years now hanging from branches in an empty living room. Each decoration told a story. Michael's handprint in clay from kindergarten, Lisa's construction paper angel with the crooked halo, ornaments from family vacations when we actually felt like a family. Michael walked past the tree without comment, as if the hours I'd spent arranging and rearranging meant nothing. The lights reflected in the black screen of his phone as he scrolled past my efforts towards something more interesting. I had bought him a present, a nice sweater from the department store where I'd used my employee discount and splurged despite my shrinking budget. It sat wrapped under the tree, the red bow perfectly tied, waiting for Christmas morning that would probably pass without acknowledgement. The loneliness was becoming physical now, a constant ache in my chest that no amount of busy work could ease. I found myself talking to Rusty, our old dog who'd passed away 3 years earlier. I'd catch myself setting 2 places at the breakfast table instead of 1, forgetting that I was the only person in this house who ate meals at actual meal times. "Mom, I need $40. Michael announced one evening as I was washing dishes. Not asked, announced, as if my wallet was part of his inheritance. "What for?" I asked, not turning around from the sink. "Does it matter?" His voice carried that edge of irritation that had become his default tone with me. "It's not like you have anything important to spend it on. Nothing important. My grocery store wages that kept food in this house and lights on weren't important. My careful budgeting that made his comfortable lifestyle possible wasn't important. I wasn't important." I dried my hands slowly, each movement deliberate. "I don't have $40 to spare right now." The silence that followed felt dangerous. I could feel his anger building behind me like a storm gathering strength. "What do you mean you don't have it?" His voice was low now, which somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You just got paid yesterday." "I got paid yesterday," I agreed, finally turning to face him. "And that money goes to mortgage, utilities, groceries, and everything else that keeps this house running while you look for work." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that I had actually explained instead of just apologizing and reaching for my purse. But the surprise quickly hardened into something uglier. Right. Everything I do to help around here doesn't count, I guess. All the job interviews, all the applications. That's not work to you. Job interviews that led nowhere because he showed up unprepared. Applications submitted half-heartedly when he bothered to submit them at all. But I didn't say that. I had learned that truth was a weapon that could be turned against me. I didn't say that, Michael. You didn't have to. He stepped closer, and instinctively, I stepped back against the counter. You know what your problem is, Mom? You've gotten selfish in your old age. Bitter. Maybe that's why Dad left. The words hit me like physical blows. My father had left when I was 8. Not Michael's father, but my own. The wound Michael had just torn open was 41 years old, and he knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. I pressed my hands against the counter behind me, feeling the edge cut into my palms. Don't, I whispered. Don't what? Tell the truth? His smile was cruel now, satisfied with the reaction he'd provoked. Face it, Mom. There's a reason people leave you. There's a reason Lisa never calls, never visits. There's a reason you're 59 years old and alone. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to shatter whatever remained of my self-worth, and they worked. Standing there in my own kitchen, I felt myself shrinking, disappearing, becoming the worthless woman he'd decided I was. He got his $40 that night. I gave it to him in silence, my hands shaking as I counted out the bills from my wallet. He took the money without thanks, without acknowledgement of what it cost me to give it, and walked away as if the entire conversation had been a minor inconvenience in his day. Christmas morning arrived gray and lifeless. I sat alone at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching snow fall outside the window. The presents under the tree remained unopened. Michael had spent Christmas Eve with friends and hadn't come home yet. Lisa had sent a card, one of those generic ones with someone else's words about family and love, but no call, no visit, no acknowledgement that this day might matter to the woman who had made every Christmas magical for her children. I thought about all the Christmas mornings when they were small, how their excitement had been my excitement, how their joy had been worth every sacrifice I made. Lisa bouncing on her bed at 5 a.m., dragging me downstairs to see what Santa had brought. Michael's gap-toothed grin when he unwrapped his first bicycle, the way he'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Where had those children gone? When had they been replaced by these strangers who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their own happiness? I pulled out the photo album I kept in the kitchen drawer, pictures from better times, when smiles were genuine and love felt unconditional. There was Michael at 5, chocolate cake smeared across his face from his birthday party. Lisa at 8, missing her front teeth, wearing the princess costume I'd sewn by hand because we couldn't afford the store-bought version. I stared at a picture of all 3 of us at Lisa's high school graduation. I was in the middle, my arms around both my children, my face glowing with pride. We looked like a real family then. We looked happy. The woman in that photograph had hope. She believed that love and sacrifice would be enough, that her children would grow up to appreciate everything she'd given them. She believed in happily ever after. I closed the album and put it back in the drawer. That woman was gone now, buried under years of disappointment and casual cruelty. In her place sat someone I barely recognized, someone who had forgotten how to dream, how to hope, how to believe she deserved better. But as I sat there in my empty house on Christmas morning, something stirred in the deepest part of my heart. Not hope. Hope was too fragile now, too easily shattered. This was something harder, more resilient. This was the quiet recognition that I had something they had forgotten. I had something they couldn't take away from me, no matter how hard they tried. I had myself, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. January came like a clean slate, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the familiar dread that usually accompanied new beginnings. Something had shifted inside me during that lonely Christmas morning. Not hope, exactly, but something quieter and more dangerous. Clarity. I started paying attention differently. Instead of rushing to fix every problem, to smooth every rough edge, to apologize for things that weren't my fault, I began to observe. I watched my son like he was a stranger I was meeting for the first time, and what I saw made my stomach turn. He was lazy in a way that went beyond unemployment. He was lazy in his soul, He woke up at noon and complained about being tired. He left dishes in the sink for days and acted surprised when I didn't immediately wash them. He borrowed money for emergencies that turned out to be video games or takeout food, then forgot he'd ever taken it. But more than the laziness, I saw the calculation. He wasn't just thoughtless, he was deliberately cruel. He studied my reactions, learned exactly which words would hurt most, then used that knowledge like a weapon whenever he wanted something from me. "Mom," he said one Tuesday morning, sprawled across the couch in yesterday's clothes, "I need you to call that temp agency for me. Tell them I'm available for work this week." I looked up from my own job search. Yes, I was looking for a second job to make ends meet, and really saw him, 32 years old, asking his nearly 60-year-old mother to make phone calls on his behalf like he was a child afraid to talk to adults. "You can call them yourself," I said calmly, turning back to my laptop. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Michael wasn't used to hearing the word no from me, especially delivered without apology or explanation. "What?" His voice carried genuine confusion, as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. "You can call them yourself," I repeated, not looking up. "You have a phone. You have the number." I felt him staring at me, trying to process this unexpected resistance. For 32 years, I had been his personal assistant, his emotional support system, his safety net. The idea that I might stop performing these services had clearly never occurred to him. "I'm busy," he said finally, gesturing vaguely at the television remote in his hand. "So am I." I closed my laptop and looked at him directly. "I'm looking for a second job because one income isn't enough to support 2 adults in this house." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You're being weird again. Weird. Not wrong, not justified. Weird." As if my refusal to enable his helplessness was a personality defect that needed to be corrected. But instead of apologizing, instead of rushing to make peace, I just nodded. Maybe I am. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went for a walk. Not to the grocery store, not to run errands, but just to move through the world as a person rather than a servant. The January air was sharp and clean, and with each step, I felt something awakening in my chest that had been sleeping for too long. I walked past houses where lights glowed warmly in windows, where families gathered around dinner tables, where people lived lives that included joy and laughter and mutual respect. For the first time in months, I didn't feel envious of those families. Instead, I felt curious about what my life might look like if I stopped accepting cruelty as the price of belonging. When I returned home, Michael was in the kitchen, standing in front of the open refrigerator with the frustrated expression of someone who expected dinner to materialize automatically. "There's nothing to eat," he announced, as if this was my personal failing. "There's plenty to eat," I replied, hanging my coat in the closet. "You just have to cook it." "Mom, I don't know how to make anything." "Then maybe it's time to learn." I walked past him toward the stairs, leaving him alone with his confusion and the revolutionary idea that he might be responsible for feeding himself. Over the following weeks, I continued my quiet rebellion. I stopped doing his laundry, not with fanfare or arguments, just stopped. When he complained about not having clean clothes, I pointed out where the washing machine was located. When he said he didn't know how to use it, I told him the internet was full of tutorials. I stopped cleaning his room, stopped making his bed, stopped picking up the trail of belongings he left throughout the house. I maintained the common areas because I lived there too, but his personal mess became his personal problem. Most importantly, I stopped absorbing his anger. When he exploded about small inconveniences, when he blamed me for his disappointments, when he tried to make his emotions my responsibility, I listened politely and then went about my business. "You're different," he accused one evening, frustration evident in every line of his body. "You're being cold." I considered his words carefully. Cold, not strong, not healthy, not finally learning to value myself. Cold. "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe I'm just tired of being warm toward people who treat me like I don't matter." The change wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, steady, like water slowly carving new channels through stone. I remembered conversations with my mother, advice I'd dismissed as outdated when I was young and certain that love could conquer anything. Baby girl. She used to tell me when I'd come home crying about some childhood injustice. You teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. If you accept cruelty, you'll get more cruelty. If you accept disrespect, you'll get more disrespect. I had spent 37 years accepting things I should have rejected, making excuses for behavior that had no excuse, prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own dignity. But I was learning something Michael had never bothered to discover. Respect isn't something you can demand or manipulate out of people. It's something you earn by respecting yourself first. It wasn't anger driving this change. Anger burns hot and fast and exhausts itself. This was something cooler, more sustainable. This was decision. This was the quiet recognition that I had value, that my life had worth, that I deserved better than the scraps of affection thrown my way when convenient. For the first time in years, when I looked in the bathroom mirror, I didn't see a failure or a victim. I saw a woman who was finally, slowly, carefully, learning to choose herself. And that choice was about to change everything. February brought an unexpected gift, a second job at the community center downtown. It wasn't much, just helping with their senior programs 3 afternoons a week, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had somewhere to go where people knew my name, where my presence was welcomed rather than tolerated. "Diana, could you help Mrs. Patterson with her watercolor class?" asked Janet, the program coordinator. She was a woman about my age, with silver hair she wore like a crown, and the kind of confident posture I was slowly learning to adopt. Mrs. Patterson was 86, sharp as a tack, and unimpressed by self-pity in any form. "You have good hands," she told me as I helped her set up easels. "Steady and careful. That's rare these days. Good hands. When was the last time anyone had complimented anything about me? When was the last time someone had seen value in something I did?" "Thank you," I said, and meant it. The community center became my sanctuary. Here, I was helpful, rather than taken for granted. Here, elderly ladies saved seats for me at lunch and shared stories about their own struggles with ungrateful children. Here, I remembered what it felt like to be appreciated. "My son calls once a month," said Eleanor, a widow in her 70s who volunteered in the library. Talks for 5 minutes about the weather, then hands the phone to my grandson who grunts hello before hanging up. 43 years old, and he acts like talking to his mother is a chore. I nodded, understanding completely. It's hard when you realize you love them more than they love you. "Oh, honey," Eleanor laughed, but there was sadness in it. "The secret is learning to love yourself as much as you loved them. Takes practice, but it can be done." At home, Michael had begun to notice the changes in me. The house was clean, but only in the areas I used regularly. His bathroom remained his responsibility, along with his bedroom and the corner of the living room where he'd created a permanent nest of video game controllers and empty energy drink cans. "This place looks like shit," he announced one evening, surveying the living room where his belongings were scattered like debris after a storm. "Your corner does," I agreed mildly. "The rest looks fine to me." "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're acting like—" He struggled for words that would make his frustration my fault. "Like you don't care about anything anymore." "I care about plenty of things," I said, not looking up from the book I was reading, a romance novel I'd borrowed from the community center library. "I just don't care about cleaning up after a 32-year-old man who's perfectly capable of cleaning up after himself." The book was about a woman who'd spent years in an unhappy marriage before finding the courage to leave and start over. Fiction, but it felt like prophecy. Michael stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "What's gotten into you lately?" What had gotten into me was simple. I'd stopped being afraid of his disapproval. For 37 years, I'd bent myself into impossible shapes trying to earn love that was always just out of reach. I'd accepted scraps and called them feasts, tolerated cruelty and called it character building. But at the community center, surrounded by women who'd lived through decades of marriage and motherhood and emerged with their dignity intact, I was learning a different way to exist in the world. "Maybe I'm just tired of being treated poorly," I said, turning a page in my book. "Treated poorly?" His voice rose with genuine indignation. "Mom, I live here. I help out around the house." I looked up from my book and studied his face. Really studied it, the way I'd been studying everything lately. When was the last time you helped with anything? I take out the trash sometimes. When I remind you 3 times and threaten to leave it in your room, I do dishes. You put your own dishes in the sink. Sometimes. He floundered, searching for evidence of his contribution to our household that we both knew didn't exist. Michael, I said gently, closing my book and giving him my full attention for the first time in weeks. When was the last time you asked how I was feeling? When was the last time you thanked me for anything? When was the last time you treated me like I was a person you cared about instead of a service you were entitled to? The questions hung in the air between us like smoke. I wasn't angry when I asked them. Anger would have given him something to fight against, something to deflect. This was worse for him, I realized. This was disappointment delivered with perfect calm. That's not... He struggled with concepts that apparently had never occurred to him before. I know, I said sadly. That's the problem. That weekend, something extraordinary happened. Lisa called, not with her usual rushed, obligatory check-in, but with actual news she seemed excited to share. Mom? Guess what? Emma made the honor roll again, and David got that promotion he's been working toward. We're thinking of taking a family vacation to celebrate, maybe Disney World or something. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, and I meant it. But as she talked about their plans and their success, I found myself listening differently. Instead of feeling excluded from their happiness, I felt oddly detached from it. We should probably do something as a family soon, Lisa continued with the vague enthusiasm of someone making promises they had no intention of keeping. Maybe a dinner or something. When things calm down? Maybe, I agreed, though we both knew it wouldn't happen. After she hung up, I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. Lisa's life was full and complete without me in it. She didn't call because she missed me or valued my advice or wanted my company. She called because it was expected, because it allowed her to check good daughter off her list of social obligations. And that was okay. It hurt, but it was okay, because I was finally understanding the difference between loving someone and needing them to love you back in specific ways. At the community center the following Monday, I mentioned my realization to Eleanor while we sorted donated books for the library sale. "Took you long enough," she said with her characteristic bluntness. "Children grow up and build their own lives. That's what they're supposed to do. The mistake we make is thinking we're supposed to shrink ourselves to fit whatever space they leave for us." "So what do we do?" I asked. She looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen 8 decades of human behavior. "We build our own lives too, honey. We figure out who we are when we're not just somebody's mother, somebody's wife, somebody's servant." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote down everything I wanted for my life. Not things I thought I should want. Not things that would make other people happy, but things that would make me feel alive and valuable and human. The list wasn't long, but each item felt revolutionary. A place of my own where no one could make me feel unwelcome. Work that mattered, where my efforts were appreciated. Friends who enjoyed my company rather than tolerated it. Peace. Quiet. The ability to make decisions based on what was best for me. As I wrote, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about my future. Not the future I was supposed to want. Not the future others expected me to accept. But the future I was going to create for myself. Michael would be fine without me. He'd have to learn to do his own laundry, cook his own meals, clean up his own messes. These were skills every adult should possess anyway. Lisa would continue her successful life with or without my presence. She'd made that abundantly clear. But I was going to discover what Diana Morrison's life could look like when she stopped trying to earn love from people who had already decided she wasn't worth the effort. The decision, when it finally crystallized in my mind, felt as natural as breathing. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was simply self-preservation, the quiet recognition that I deserved a life where I was valued rather than tolerated. And I was going to have it. March 15th. I'll remember that date for the rest of my life. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because it was the day I finally stopped being afraid of my own son. The morning started like any other. Michael lounged on the couch in his pajamas at 11 a.m., surrounded by the detritus of his comfortable life. Empty pizza boxes, energy drink cans, Video game controllers scattered across coffee tables I no longer bothered to clear. The smell of unwashed clothes and stale air hung around his corner of the living room like a personal cloud. I was dressed for my shift at the community center, where I'd been promoted to assistant coordinator, a title that came with actual respect and a small raise. Mrs. Patterson had recommended me personally, saying I had natural leadership abilities and the patience of a saint. It was amazing how saintly patience looked when it was finally being appreciated rather than exploited. "Mom," Michael called without looking up from his phone, "I need you to pick up more of those frozen dinners I like. The good ones, not the cheap shit." I paused at the front door, keys in my hand, and looked at this man who was technically my son, but had become something else entirely, a parasite who'd forgotten the difference between family and servant. "No," I said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Michael's head snapped up from his phone, his expression shifting from lazy entitlement to confused irritation. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I won't be buying your dinners anymore, or doing your shopping, or managing your meals." I adjusted my purse strap and smiled at him with perfect calm. "You're 32 years old, Michael. It's time you learn to feed yourself." Something dangerous flickered across his face. The same expression I'd learned to fear over the years, the one that preceded explosions and cruel words and sometimes worse. "Are you fucking kidding me right now?" His voice was low, controlled, which somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "I'm not kidding at all." I opened the door, letting in the crisp March air that smelled like possibility. "I'm going to work. There's a grocery store 6 blocks away if you need food." "Mom." He stood up now, and I saw him clearly, all 6 feet and 200 pounds of him, using his physical presence as intimidation the way he'd learned to do over the years. "You're not going anywhere until we settle this." For just a moment, the old fear flickered through me. For just a moment, I was the woman who'd spent years apologizing for things that weren't her fault, smoothing over conflicts she hadn't started, accepting blame for other people's choices. But then I remembered Eleanor's words. "You teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept." And I remembered Mrs. Patterson saying, "You have good hands, Diana, steady and careful." And I remembered Janet telling me just yesterday, "I don't know how we managed this program before you came along." I remembered that there were people in this world who valued me, appreciated me, treated me with basic human dignity. And none of those people were standing in my living room right now, demanding that I continue to enable his helplessness. "Actually, Michael," I said, stepping onto the porch, "I am going somewhere. I'm going to work, where people are grateful for what I do instead of demanding more of it." I pulled the door closed behind me and heard him calling my name, not with affection, not with concern, but with the frustrated bewilderment of someone whose personal servant had just quit without notice. At the community center, I threw myself into work with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I organized the senior book club, helped coordinate a health screening event, and spent an hour teaching Mrs. Chen how to use the computer to video call her grandchildren in California. "You seem different today," Janet observed during our lunch break. "Lighter somehow." "I think I'm finally learning to put myself first," I told her, and saying the words out loud made them feel more real, more permanent. "Good for you. Life's too short to spend it making everyone else comfortable while you disappear." When I returned home that evening, I knew immediately that something had changed. The house felt different, charged, electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. Michael was waiting for me in the kitchen, and he wasn't alone. Lisa sat at the table, her expression a mixture of concern and barely concealed irritation. She'd driven 3 hours from her suburban paradise, apparently summoned by her brother's panicked phone call about their mother's sudden breakdown. "Mom," Lisa said, standing as I entered, "we need to talk." The staging was deliberate. Both of my children positioned to make me feel cornered, outnumbered, like I was the problem that needed to be solved. It was a tactic that would have worked 6 months ago, when I still believed that keeping peace was worth sacrificing pieces of my soul. "Hello, Lisa," I said calmly, setting my purse on the counter. "This is unexpected." "Michael called me," she said, her voice carrying the particular tone of exasperation reserved for unreasonable parents. "He's worried about you." "We both are." "Worried about what exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious. "About this." Lisa gestured vaguely, searching for words to describe behavior she clearly found inexplicable. This sudden change in your personality. Michael says you're being cold, uncooperative, that you're refusing to help with basic household tasks. Basic household tasks. Like feeding a grown man who was perfectly capable of feeding himself. Like cleaning up after someone who'd never learned to take responsibility for his own mess. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Designer clothes, professional manicure, the kind of confident posture that came from never doubting your place in the world. She'd built a successful life, married a good man, raised children who would never speak to her the way her brother spoke to me, and she'd done it all while maintaining perfect distance from the woman who'd made it possible. I'm not being uncooperative, I said. I'm just not being cooperative in ways that enable Michael to avoid growing up. Mom, he's going through a hard time, Lisa said, slipping into the role of reasonable mediator she'd perfected over the years. The job market is tough. He needs our support. Our support. As if Lisa had been contributing anything beyond moral judgment and occasional phone calls. He's been going through a hard time for 10 years, I replied. And in all that time, instead of learning skills that might help him become self-sufficient, he's learned that his problems become my problems if he makes my life unpleasant enough. Michael, who'd been silent during this exchange, finally erupted. This is bullshit. Lisa, you see what I'm dealing with? She's lost her mind. She won't cook, won't clean, won't do anything a normal mother would do. A normal mother. The phrase hit me like a physical blow, but not in the way he'd intended. Instead of shame, I felt a strange kind of liberation. You're right, I said, my voice perfectly steady. A normal mother would have taught her son how to do laundry, how to cook basic meals, how to clean up after himself. A normal mother would have insisted he get a job and contribute to the household. A normal mother would have demanded respect instead of accepting abuse. I looked directly at Michael, this man who'd somehow convinced himself that his inability to function as an adult was my responsibility to fix. A normal mother would have raised a son who thanked her instead of taking her for granted, who helped her instead of using her, who treated her with kindness instead of cruelty. My voice never rose above conversational level, but each word landed with the precision of an arrow finding its target. But I wasn't a normal mother. I was a mother who was so afraid of being unloved that I forgot to teach you how to love. And that's on me. But what happens next is on you. The silence that followed was profound. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly recognizing truths she'd been avoiding for years. Michael stared at me with something approaching shock, as if he'd never considered that his behavior might be the problem rather than my reaction to it. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, his voice smaller now, uncertain. I smiled at both of my children, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the calm certainty of someone who'd finally figured out who she was. It means I'm done raising you, I said. Both of you. It's time for me to start living my own life. 3 months later, I signed the lease on a small apartment near the coast. 1 bedroom, hardwood floors, and a kitchen window that looked out onto a garden where someone had planted roses. It wasn't much by most people's standards, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every decorative choice, every moment of silence belonged to me alone. The apartment hunt had been an adventure in rediscovering who Diana Morrison was when she wasn't defined by other people's needs. I'd chosen the location not for its proximity to family or its convenience for their visits, but because I loved the sound of the ocean at night and the way the morning light painted everything golden. Michael had initially assumed my announcement was some kind of elaborate bluff designed to shock him into better behavior. He'd spent the weeks following our confrontation, alternating between wounded confusion and manipulative apologies, neither of which moved me the way they once would have. "Mom, you can't be serious about this," he'd said when I'd started packing my personal belongings. Books, photographs, the few treasures I'd accumulated over nearly 6 decades of life. Where am I supposed to go? The question revealed everything about how he viewed our relationship. Not, how will we work this out? Or, what can I do to fix this? But, where am I supposed to go? As if my primary function was to provide him with shelter and support regardless of how he treated me. "You're 32 years old," I'd replied calmly, folding the quilt my mother had made into a moving box. "You'll figure it out the same way millions of other adults do every day. But I don't have any money saved up. I don't even have a job right now." "Then I guess you'd better find one." The simplicity of it seemed to astound him. For his entire adult life, his problems had become my emergencies. His failures had become my responsibilities. The idea that he might have to solve his own difficulties was apparently revolutionary. Lisa had been less dramatic, but no more supportive. She'd called several times with increasingly frantic suggestions. Couldn't I just set some boundaries instead of moving out completely? Wouldn't family therapy help? Had I considered that I might be going through some kind of midlife crisis? "It's not a midlife crisis, sweetheart," I'd explained during our last conversation. "It's just life. I'm choosing to live it on my own terms for once." "But what about family?" she'd pressed. "What about staying close, being there for each other?" The irony was breathtaking. Lisa, who called twice a month out of obligation, who visited twice a year as if she were doing me a favor, who'd spent years treating me like an inconvenient relative rather than the woman who'd sacrificed her own dreams to make Lisa's possible. She was suddenly concerned about family closeness. "Family," I'd said gently, "is supposed to be people who love and support each other, not people who take everything you offer and demand more." Moving day arrived with unseasonable warmth and crystalline blue skies. Janet and Eleanor had volunteered to help, along with Mrs. Patterson, who'd insisted she was perfectly capable of carrying boxes despite being 86 years old. These women, my real family, the one I'd chosen and who'd chosen me in return, made the day feel less like an ending and more like a celebration. "Look at this place!" Eleanor exclaimed, standing in my new living room with her hands on her hips. "Diana, this is perfect. You can actually breathe here." She was right. The space felt larger than it actually was, filled with possibility instead of resentment, silence instead of tension. For the first time in decades, I could walk through my own home without calculating someone else's mood or preparing for someone else's demands. Michael hadn't come to help with the move, though he'd made a point of being ostentatiously present when the moving truck arrived, lounging on the front porch with an expression of wounded martyrdom that might have made me feel guilty 6 months earlier. Now it just looked like what it was. A grown man pouting because his personal servant had finally quit. My new life took shape quickly. The community center had offered me a full-time position with actual benefits and vacation time. I'd enrolled in a watercolor class Mrs. Patterson taught at the local college, discovering I had a natural talent for mixing colors and capturing light. On weekends, I explored coastal towns I'd always wanted to visit but never had time for when other people's needs came first. The silence was the most beautiful part. Not the absence of sound. My apartment was filled with music I chose, conversations with friends who valued my opinion, the gentle sounds of a life lived deliberately. It was the silence of conflict, the absence of walking on eggshells, the peace that came from not having to anticipate someone else's anger or disappointment. 2 months after I moved, Michael showed up at my door unannounced. I saw him through the kitchen window before he knocked, thinner than I remembered, wearing clothes that looked like they needed washing, carrying himself with the defeated posture of someone whose safety net had been permanently removed. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, and his voice carried a quality I'd never heard before. Uncertainty, maybe even humility. "Can we talk?" I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. Instead, I saw exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let him into the space I'd created for myself. "Would you like some coffee?" He nodded, looking around my apartment with something like wonder. "This is nice, Mom. Really nice. Thank you." I poured 2 cups of coffee, noting absently that he waited for me to sit before taking his own seat, a small courtesy that would have been unremarkable from anyone else but felt revolutionary coming from him. "I got a job," he said without preamble. "It's not great, stocking shelves at a warehouse, but it's 40 hours a week and they said I could work overtime if I want." "That's good, Michael. I'm proud of you for that." He looked surprised by the compliment, as if positive feedback was something foreign and unexpected. "I'm living in a studio apartment across town. It's pretty small, but," he shrugged, "it's mine, you know? I did know. The pride of having something that belonged to you, that you'd earned through your own efforts, was something I'd only recently rediscovered myself. We talked for an hour. Really talked, perhaps for the first time in years. He told me about the challenges of living alone, about learning to do laundry and cook basic meals, about the satisfaction of receiving his first paycheck. I told him about my art classes, my work at the community center, the quiet joy of making decisions based solely on what would make me happy. "Mom," he said as he was preparing to leave, "I owe you an apology, a real one." I waited, curious to see if he'd actually managed to identify what he was apologizing for. "I treated you terribly, for years. I took advantage of your kindness and I was cruel when you didn't deserve it. He paused, struggling with concepts that were clearly new to him. "I never really saw you as a person, I guess. Just as my mom, like that was your only job in the world." The apology was more than I'd expected and less than I'd once needed. Months earlier, these words would have meant everything to me, would have opened floodgates of forgiveness and welcome. Now they felt like simple acknowledgement of facts we both already knew. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means more than you know. Do you think—" He hesitated, vulnerability making him look younger than his 32 years. "Do you think we could maybe start over? Not go back to how things were, but maybe build something better?" I considered his question carefully. The woman I'd been would have rushed to reassure him, would have opened her arms and her heart without reservation. But the woman I'd become understood that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enabling disguised as affection. "I'd like that," I said finally, "but it would have to be different this time. It would have to be mutual respect, both ways. It would have to be a relationship between equals, not between a servant and someone who takes service for granted." He nodded seriously. "I understand. And Mom, I really am sorry, not just for hitting you that night, but for all of it, for making you feel invisible in your own life." After he left, I sat in my apartment as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this place. I thought about forgiveness, not the instant, automatic forgiveness I'd once offered to avoid conflict, but the slower, more deliberate kind that came after justice had been served. Michael was learning to be a better man, but he was learning it because I'd finally stopped enabling him to be a worse one. Lisa still called occasionally, though our conversations were briefer now, less fraught with expectations that would never be met. She was building her own life, and I was building mine, and maybe someday we'd find a way to share them without losing ourselves in the process. 6 months later, I received a letter that made me smile. It was from Michael, written on actual paper in his careful handwriting. "Mom, I wanted to tell you about something that happened at work yesterday. My supervisor complimented me on my reliability and mentioned they're considering me for a promotion. I know that might not sound like much, but it felt amazing to be recognized for something I'd earned myself. I keep thinking about what you said about building something better, and I think maybe I'm finally starting to understand what you meant. Thank you for loving me enough to stop enabling me. I hope I'm becoming someone you can be proud of." I tucked the letter into my kitchen drawer, next to the photo album filled with pictures from happier times, not to replace those memories, but to add new ones, better ones. That evening, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea and my latest watercolor project, listening to the sound of waves against the shore. Mrs. Patterson had been right. I did have good hands. Steady and careful hands that were finally learning to create beauty instead of just cleaning up other people's messes. The woman in my bathroom mirror now had silver hair she wore proudly, eyes that held wisdom instead of fear, and shoulders that no longer curved inward with the weight of everyone else's problems. She looked like someone who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop accepting what diminishes your own humanity. I'd spent nearly 60 years learning to put everyone else first. The rest of my life was going to be about discovering what Diana Morrison could become when she finally put herself first. And from where I sat, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and possibility, that future looked absolutely beautiful. I learned that sometimes it's the silence that speaks loudest of all.